Yesterday, our friends from the legal assistance group called Ideals delivered 140 kilos of CAMOTE, of sweet potatoes, to our Caritas Caloocan office here at San Roque Cathedral. This group, Ideals, has been among our most dedicated partners in the human rights work in the diocese. The group's coordinator texted me earlier in the morning to inform me na yun daw mga kaibigan nilang magsasaka ay umani ng kamote. And they decided to share some of the kamote to the poor in our mission stations in the diocese. I imagine that this group of farmers had benefited from the free legal assistance being generously extended to the poor by this group of young lawyers. The farmers must have felt really grateful. They decided to return the favor, not by compensating the lawyers, but by paying it forward, ika nga, pay it forward to other poor people like them in the city slums who might be going hungry already during this pandemic. Actually, we have been receiving a lot of generous donations in kind from generous people, most of them from relatively rich people, people with means. Sacks of rice, canned goods, noodles, coffee, sometimes even ready-to-cook frozen chicken. But these farmers and their harvest of kamote came to my mind this morning as I was reflecting on today's reading about the multiplication of the loaves story in the Gospel of St. John. Kasi unlike the other Gospels, which also have their own parallels of this story, John is referring to this story not as a miracle, but as a sign, isang palatandaan. Kaya, ako din, I took the kamote as a sign of hope in the midst of this pandemic. What is truly unique about the way John tells this story of the feeding of the multitude is the fact that the 5 loaves and the 2 fish that served as Jesus' raw material had come from a boy. Bigay ng isang bata. I imagine him, this boy, being asked by his parents to present their humble offering to Jesus after they heard him say, "Where can we buy some food to give these people to eat?" And I imagine how touched Jesus must have been when he received the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish from a poor family. From a poor family. Of course, you would ask, bakit alam ninyo na poor yung family? Kasi nung panahon ni Jesus, yung mga middle class at upper class people, hindi sila kumakain ng tinapay made of barley. Ang tawag sa barley loaves, the bread of the poor. Kasi the type of grain, yung barley, that was used was normally fed only to the donkeys and the horses. That's why they called it the bread of the poor. And Jesus must have felt the same way about the 5 barley loaves as he did when once he was at the temple area At nakita niya yung isang matandang balo, a poor widow, dropping 2 copper coins in the treasury box of the temple. And remember what Jesus said? How he said the poor woman's contribution was worth more than all the huge amounts being donated by the wealthy donors and benefactors who gave from their excess. Well, the CAMOTE donation yesterday also reminded me of another CAMOTE story. Pasensya na ho't hahaba ng konti. Another CAMOTE story from a wealthy family from Ermita during the Japanese occupation. One of the daughters of this family wrote about the experience, and her story got published in a magazine which I read when I was still in high school many decades ago. She said that in spite of their family's apparent wealth, mansyon pa nga yung bahay nila, nung Japanese occupation, they came to a point when they had run out of food. There was nothing left in their pantry but a few cups of rice. They had money, but during the Japanese occupation, walang kwentang pera. Perang hapon, ika nga. There was nothing to buy in the market. Her mother had decided to just make lugaw out of the rice. Lugaw, porridge, so that they could stretch it a bit para umabot na siya ng supper. At di na nila alam ang kakainin the following day. At ito nagkukwento, natandaan niya that she hid in her closet a bar of chocolate. And she took it and gave it to her mother para naman may lasa yung lugaw at maging champurado. And one of her brothers had been sent on an errand by her mother. Pinapunta siya sa palengke to find some food. Baka sakali merong yung parang black market, magbebenta ng corned beef or sardines, kahit na daw 10 times the price bibilhin niya. And it was right at that moment na biglang tumunog ang mga sirena, which meant there was going to be a fighting and bombing because the Americans were advancing. And so, the mother got really worried for her brother. Her brother was already in the market, but he headed straight back home nung marinig niya yung sirena. At habang naglalakad siya o tumatakbong pauwi, may narinig siyang tumawag sa pangalan niya. He heard the familiar voice calling from behind him. And guess who it was? Ang former housemaid nila na sila Green, who had left them already and returned to the province nung pumutok ang gyera. At meron daw siya, on top of her head, isang sako ng kamote. Kinuwento niya na umani sila ng kamote and she sold it in the market. Pero bago maubos, naisip niya, isi-share niya yung isang sako sa dating boss niya. The mother daw was in tears when she received the sack of kamote from Lagring. She even invited her to join the family for lunch and to enjoy with them her fresh harvest of kamote. You know what the mother did? She brought out the best silverware and chinaware, complete with the crystal goblets and embroidered napkins that they had in their aparador. Parang Noche Buena. And the mother did all the cooking herself, and she invited Lagring to sit with them, and she served Lagring like a queen. She had never joined them for meals before, as Lagring only ate in the servants' quarters. But the war had reversed the situation. Now, it was the poor housemaid who gave them something to eat. Her humble CAMOTE had raised her dignity in their eyes from a servant to a member of the family. And together now, they ate champorado and boiled CAMOTE with class. Something like this is happening in the gospel story. Take note what Jesus says when his disciples react and they say, "What good is this for so many?" Jesus orders the people to recline. Ewan ko kung napansin niyo yun. He ordered them not to sit, but to recline. Anong ibig sabihin nun? Back in those days, yung mga elite lang. It was only the rich among the Romans who reclined when they were eating. Para bang sinasabi ni Jesus, "Come on, let us eat this precious food like the rich Romans do, with class and in style. Just sit back, relax, and we will serve you." Jesus did not say, "Papilahin nyo yung mga tao. Bigyan nyo sila ng stub na may number bawat isa." You know, the usual thing that happens in feeding centers and relief distributions. I remember when Mount Pinatubo erupted, there was a group of benefactors that did not want to follow the system of distribution. Gusto nila papilahin ng mga tao at sila mismo magbibigay isa-isa. And they also brought some candies with them. Ang ginawa, tinawag ang mga bata, tinapon yung mga candy sa hangin so that the kids would scramble like dogs to be able to grab 1 or 2 pieces. The parents felt so insulted. They told their children to stand still. And one of the mothers talked to the benefactors, and she said, "Ma'am, we're truly grateful for the food that you give us. But please, save whatever little dignity is left in us." Natulala siya. If there was one thing really consistent about the personality of Jesus, it was his constant desire to lift up the dignity of the poor, never to treat the poor as mere objects of charity. He made them see their real worth in God's eyes and gave them the opportunity to grow from beneficiaries to fellow benefactors. He also wanted them to know what it means to partake of God's rich banquet in His kingdom. And so, do you see now why I said to you, John thinks of this story not as a miracle, but rather as a sign?